Talk about the next Zelda game has been picking up more and more recently. The time for the next Zelda game is going to be pretty soon. Within the next year, or just 2019 in general, we will probably have something new to look at for the Zelda series. Whether it's an announcement with a teaser trailer or a full-on trailer, it's likely that we see something. Now, this is a part 2 video to last week's video. In part 1, I talked about if the next Zelda game could top Breath of the Wild in terms of the hype, build-up, sales, and all of that stuff. This part is about the actual game itself, and the stuff I believe it needs to do to be better than Breath of the Wild. Keep in mind, Nintendo themselves have said that the next game will be very similar in style, as in it's going to be open world, and more than likely on the same engine. Along with this, we know the game did start the early stages of development shortly after Breath of the Wild had been out, so let's take a look at what I believe the next installment to the Zelda series has to do better in order to be better than the mighty Breath of the Wild. So, the first area I want to talk about is the towns and villages for the next game. Breath of the Wild did have an alright selection, and small stables scattered around Hyrule too. However, they seemed a little lifeless to me, or at least not as full of life as they could have been. Some of the stuff I would love to see in the next game is more small settlements around the land. Yes, the stables can stay, as they were pretty cool and helpful, but I think it would be pretty cool if we could get some small little setups or camps that travelers could stop by, and there is also another purpose for these that we will visit later in the video, so keep them in mind. Another thing I'd love to see be brought into the towns is more in-depth relationships with the members of the town or village. This could perhaps be done by, if you talk to them often, you start to build up a good relationship. I also thought having more side quests through towns and villages could help a lot, as they could be used to build up good relationships by helping out the community of that town or village. If you build up a good relationship with a member of the town or village, you could even get a reward or some sort of specialty from them. Say you talk to a store owner pretty often, and did a few side quests for them over time. They could perhaps give you a small discount at their store from now on, or something along those lines. Another thing I'd love to see is slightly tied into that last one, and this is the option to purchase a home within any town or village. However, different towns have different requirements, mainly based on how wealthy they are. A less rich town will charge you less for the home, and maybe just ask a favour of you. Then the richer towns will ask for a very hefty price tag. I think this would be awesome because in Breath of the Wild there is so many beautiful towns and villages all over the land, yet we can only purchase a home in one of them. It would be really cool if this was an option all over the land of Hyrule. One last thing for this area I thought about was acting as a guard for the town, well, protecting the town from random enemy attacks. I'm not quite sure how this would come around, but something like that would be pretty cool, especially if you got paid for it. Overall, I just want to see more lively and active communities within towns and villages in the next game. Moving on to the next area, the dungeons and story of the game. Now, this is arguably one of the biggest selling points of a game, and needs to be something a player wants to complete. I'm not saying Breath of the Wild's dungeons and story were something players didn't want to complete, but they were pretty lackluster and just bland. A little boring too, in my opinion. For one, all 4 dungeons had the same design and aesthetic to them, so did the bosses, along with having barely any enemies whatsoever. Yes, they did have some puzzles in the dungeons, but that was kind of it. The story was good in Breath of the Wild, but the way we learned it was just awful in my opinion. Yeah, it was a cool concept learning from the memories, but it doesn't connect the player whatsoever. So, to improve the dungeons, I think the format of doing them in any order can stay. It fits the open world style a lot better. However, to combat the dungeons being similar, I think each dungeon should have different difficulties. Not the boss themselves, but the dungeon. So if you stroll up to a dungeon that's meant for later in the game, it will be a real challenge, near impossible, but not fully impossible. This will encourage players to take on the easier dungeons first, then the harder ones later. Also, they need to be way longer. In Breath of the Wild, you could have a divine beast down in 15 minutes. That's including the boss fight. They need to make them bigger in size, have more puzzles, and please add some enemies to make it a little bit challenging. The bosses and dungeons themselves have to look different from each other this time round. Please Nintendo, just go back to theming them off elements, and don't give them the same design. Please. Now, the story for the game is an interesting one. The game could have some sort of relation to Breath of the Wild. The developers haven't said if it will be connected to Breath of the Wild in any way, story-wise. We just know it's likely to look very similar and play very similar. So, if the game is connected to Breath of the Wild, let's say it's set after Breath of the Wild. Something that they could focus on is developing the story and lives of the current champions, the descendant of the original champions that died. Something as simple as this could work really well, as this time round we could learn a story as we play, not learn about a story that happened 100 years ago. A popular idea that I was told about is the possibility of controlling the current champions and completing a little bit of their story playing as them. Personally, I don't think this is a bad idea, but to me, I would be fine with playing as just Link. The whole idea of controlling a different character could be a topic to cover in a future video though. The main thing for the story for me is I just think it needs to be something we can follow along with and learn about as we go, as it happens. Also, it would be pretty cool if the decisions you make could alter the result of certain stuff in the game, from the ending of the game itself to the end of a side quest. This makes your choices affect the story and adds a little bit of personality to the game. Next up, I want something to be added to the game. A whole new system, I guess. This is a trading, selling, buying, and repairing system. Now, I think we can all agree how annoying it was for a weapon or shield to just break in the middle of combat fairly often in Breath of the Wild. Now, a repairing system could work pretty well. How I see it possibly working is when you get that message telling you that your weapon is close to breaking, this is when you could go find a blacksmith. Something I think each settlement should include in the game. Someone who can repair your weapon back to its full durability. Now, of course you would need to pay them a sum of rupees, and also bring them materials in order for them to repair the item. I also thought about upgrading your weapons and armor. This would work very much like repairing. You bring the materials and the money to the blacksmith, then he or she would upgrade your weapons or armor, with a limit to how much they can be upgraded. I don't want to be totally overpowered soon into the game, like we are in Breath of the Wild. Now, the trading, selling and buying system should be pretty self-explanatory, but to go into it a little, basically you would be able to trade certain items with NPCs within villages, towns or even on the road. For example, someone who sells ingredients and meals would be willing to trade you food for your food, and a blacksmith would be willing to perhaps trade an okay sword for a decent shield you have. Then, selling and buying is pretty simple too. You go up to a blacksmith, see a sword you want, and buy it. Same goes for selling. You can offer your goods to an NPC, and if it's a good fit for them, you sell it to them. Now, remember earlier in the video, when I told you to remember about small camps and setups on the road? Well, I came up with that idea mainly for trading, more so for traveling traders. This is so, if you're on your travels to a location, there will be small setup camps that move around the map and offer you simple trades like food, weapons and all that sort of stuff. If this was to be introduced, I think it would solve a lot of complaints people had about the weapon durability, and also add something extra to the game at the same time. Last from my list, I would love to see some after game content. Yes, Breath of the Wild had a master mode, which increased the difficulty a good bit. However, that was DLC, not something every player had access to. What I had in mind for this wasn't necessarily extra story, as that could come later, similar to the Champion's Ballad. What I was thinking is along the lines of 1. Master mode, but included with the actual game, and 2. Updates to the game that add side quests every few weeks or something like that. I think this would be a cool concept if either every 2 weeks or every month Nintendo added a few new side quests, and maybe after a while they all connect to each other. So it's sort of like a story that you will find out bit by bit every time new content is released for it. Over the course of perhaps a calendar year, the full story could be told. It's a little bit of a long shot idea, but definitely something interesting and different. That's really it for after game content, as I'm sure they will have something, regardless of what it is. That's my thoughts for what the next Zelda game needs to include to be a better game than Breath of the Wild. As I said earlier in the video, this is the second part to a 2-part video. The first part I covered the build up, sales, and everything like that about the next game, so be sure to go check it out if you haven't already. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to subscribe for more Zelda videos like this one. If you want to come chat to myself and a bunch of other awesome people, we have a Discord server that you can all join through the link below. We talk about Zelda, gaming, and just whatever. Again, I really hope you all enjoyed this video, and until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.